Welcome to an exciting topic today on scenario analysis and wargaming. I'm joined by what I consider to be the three preeminent experts in terms of advanced intelligence analytics, Dr. Craig Fleisher, Mr. Arik Garland, and Mr. Arik Johnson. What we're going to talk about in today's session is how to shape, in an organizational context, more effective scenario planning, more effective wargaming, more effective advanced analytics, guys, around how to be more predictive, more analytical in our businesses. So Arik, when you think about scenario analysis and wargaming, what are some of the common pitfalls that you think need to be avoided?
Well, I think the biggest one is that there's never any context around the actual issue that's being gamed or planned or analyzed. Most organizations apply wargaming and scenario analysis techniques to generic situations about their business, and they never have a lens through which to focus these advanced methods to really come out with some actionable decisions and some recommendations for action.
One of the biggest issues out there is that people don't collect information about what's next. They're not getting the right trend information, they're not getting the right information about maybe what their competitors are up to. So they're starting from a point of not even having the data very often. And when you start a strategic simulation without good, hardcore data to begin with, all you're doing is exercising your existing assumptions about the marketplace, and that's deadly. There's a lot of organizations out there that very passionately research yesterday, and they go through all the ways that it could look like today. Even worse, you might be just examining the future that you imagine will be out there or that you assume will be like today. And then, you're using these great intellectual tools to very little value.
These things are never done in isolation. They're always done in a much bigger pattern or sequence of planning, of problem solving, of understanding our changing context, of doing our research. If we do these things in isolation and we don't do the stuff that you need to do before, we don't do the stuff that you need to do after, and you need to keep doing, you're going to get false sense of security. You're going to get blind spots that are just going to be larger than they were going into the process. No analytical techniques or tools are ever done in isolation. They're always done in various sequences, which can be planned out. But again, you can't plan those out until you've gone through the necessary precursor steps. And that's been a problem. Most companies don't spend the time to do the precursor steps. And they actually don't spend the time to think about the kind of research that they'll be doing on top of the research that they're doing presently.
Arik, you and I have talked about using the example of a flight simulator, and share that example with our audience, because I think it's really pertinent to what intelligence professionals go through in their day-to-day job.
Well, I don't think anyone would want to fly on an aircraft that is being flown by a pilot who's never landed the plane at a particular airport or taken off, for that matter. In fact, before a pilot lands an aircraft at a given airport, they go through hundreds of iterations and permutations of those iterations. For example, using the environment, using different traffic patterns, using different constitutions of aircraft, all sorts of different variables that are factored in. And ultimately, that makes for a very prepared pilot and cabin crew that can bring a plane down in a very efficient, safe manner and ultimately guarantee the safety of the passengers. And I think that's a great example of what our CEOs and senior management staff at the corporations that we count on ultimately for the soundness of our society in many ways and the economy that our society depends on. Really, we really need to equip those pilots ultimately with the analytic capability to forecast for these sorts of uncertain circumstances.
And what passes for simulation all too often, I've seen more than I'd like to, is people that are trying to run that flight simulator of a sunny day where everything works great, and that's what they practice thinking. That worked really great when global economies were growing kind of smoothly for 30 and 40 years. I understand why people only focused on performance. Just get the sales guys out there and hit it harder, and then that's what we'll call strategical thinking. When you get real information and you apply the real analytical tools to it, you can open yourself up to what you need to do. Which is practice thinking about unpredictable situations. And you take Captain Sully there. Guys like that are practicing what happens if we end up over a city and we only have 1,000 feet of elevation and we've got 1 or 2 good places to land. At what point do I kick the rudder and the aileron? That's the stuff they practice. And if we can just get that kind of context and thinking over to an organizational strategy, we're going to have better companies.
Those firms out there that would say it's too costly, it's too time consuming, it's too whatever to bring a group of people together and do a scenario planning
or we
exercise,
don't have the data,
or a wargaming exercise. Yeah, we don't have the data to support such an effort. What would you tell those organizations? Would you have any words of wisdom, coaching, advice?
That's the same short-sighted kind of thinking, right? We don't have time to plan. So, so therefore we don't, nobody plans to fail, right? We just fail to plan. That short-sightedness has caused companies to have problems for an awful long time. And it's become an issue for a lot of companies because, again, in fighting fires all the time, you're never able to prevent them. And so we've gone away from that preventive, this need. You think about great athletes. Great athletes, in order to perform great on the day that I have to do it, the World Championship. I've practiced how many times? I never didn't have enough time to do it. I made time to do it. If it's important, you do it, and you practice it, and you practice it, and you practice it again until the day that it's important and I can win the World Championship because the one play I've got to make, I can execute it to precision. I'm ready to go. I've thought of all the contingencies. I'm ready to handle anything that might come my way. If you want to be world class, you've got to be prepared. Ill preparation is no excuse for failure, unfortunately, and yet that's what ends up happening.
That's exactly what it is, though. It's an excuse. It's a viable excuse that you can't predict the future. So why try? Right. And I think it's absolutely incompetent of managers to assume that's a viable excuse. I think it does not, release them of their responsibility to consider what might happen. And I think most recently the disaster, that we saw unfolding recently in Japan and the earthquake and the tsunami that's hit that country. What are the predictions around something like that taking place, and how will that affect the supply chains of companies outside of the country of Japan? I mean, if you're Apple Computer and you get a particular chip manufactured by Hitachi, for example, in a plant in Japan, and your iPad version 2 is dependent upon that chip being available, suddenly you're out of business.